Good evening, our viewers. Namaskar, and good morning to our viewers in India, and good evening to our viewers in United States. We are here once again meeting on the second Monday of the month for our roundtable discussion for the Council for Strategic Affairs. And today's topic is very timely, very contemporary, and very contentious. We are going to be talking on looming CAATSA sanctions on India by US. That is the theme of today's roundtable discussion. Those of you who registered will have seen this flyer. We have three distinguished experts who will be enlightening us with their views on this particular topic, following which we'll have a Q&A session. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations. Council for Strategic Affairs fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the awareness. CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. And lastly, CSA condemns terrorism in all forms worldwide. A little bit about our activities. We have a monthly roundtable discussion, as I stated, on second Monday of each month at 8 p.m. Eastern Day Time. We have a monthly guest lecture series by a domain expert. CSA also organizes symposia, meetings, and conferences. And CSA promotes publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. So I'm going to briefly introduce our three distinguished experts whom you are going to see on the video very soon. The first one is Brigadier Dr. Arun Sahgal. And actually, Brigadier Dr. Sahgal is not new to us. This is the second time he's appearing on a CSA program and actually on the same topic. If I may add, we had a similar presentation on CAATSA in July of 2021. The difference now is that the S400 batteries, at least two of them have been delivered. So there are different atmospherics. So a little bit about Brigadier Dr. Arun Sahgal. He's a retired brigadier of Indian Army. He was previously the founding director of Office of Net Assessment, Indian Integrated Defense Staff, head of the Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation, United Services Institute of India, and senior fellow at the Institute of IDSA in New Delhi. His research comprises scenario planning, workshops, geopolitical and strategic assessments related to Asian security, and issues concerning nuclear doctrine and strategic stability in South Asia. His publications include co-authored books and net assessments for IDS, Defense Research and Development Organization, and the Indian National Security Council, which is NSC, and other clients. He has been a member of the Task Force on Net Assessment and Simulation under the NSC and a consultant with DRDO. He recently finished a monograph on strategic stability in South Asia. He also conducts simulation and strategic games at IDS, Ministry of Defense, National Defense College, College of Defense Management, and other international clients. He's a member of a number of Track 1.5 and Track 2 initiatives. Our second distinguished speaker is retired Lieutenant General VK Saxena. And again, he is Lieutenant General Dr. VK Saxena. He is the former Director General of the Corps of Army Air Defense. He has been decorated 3 times by the President of India. Presently, he is the Distinguished Fellow at VIF. The General is a prolific writer who has authored 5 books and is regularly published by the defense media of the country. He is also a regular presence at the TV shows, contributing to many defense issues. And finally, our most distinguished speaker is retired Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. And actually, he does not need any introduction, if I may say so. Uh, he is heavily decorated and he served for more than 40 years in the Army, spending much of his command and field tenures at the LOC and LAC in Jammu and Kashmir. He commanded the Indian Army's elite 15 corps at Srinagar. Post superannuation, he continues to pursue the study of the dynamics of J&K and is currently the Chancellor of the Central University of Kashmir. He was appointed a member of the National Disaster Management Authority of India on February 21st, 2020 by the Honorable Prime Minister. He writes very frequently in the mainstream media and is a regular TV commentator on Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and issues connected with India's national security. A graduate of Royal College of Defence Studies, London's King's College London, Asia Pacific Center, Hawaii, in United States, St. Stephen's College in Delhi, and Sherwood College in Nainital. General Hasnain actively introduced and promoted the scholar warrior concept in the Indian Army. So certain housekeeping rules before we actually start. I would like our audience to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. I would like people to change their cell phone settings to vibration mode. I would like the audience not to interrupt our esteemed speakers. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. People who do not declare themselves and are anonymous will not be allowed to pose any questions. We would like you to send your questions by the chat function. Please be very precise and specific in asking a question. Please do not send comments or a lecture in the form of a monologue in the guise of a question. You are not the distinguished expert for this particular presentation, so be very specific and precise. Finally, we are recording this event and it will be available on our YouTube channel within next 24 hours. Before I start the discussion, I would like to observe a 30 seconds period of silence in the memory and honor of a very distinguished Indian soldier, CDS General Bipin Rawat. Times are tough, but the show must go on. And although this event has been very traumatic for most of people who are of Indian origin and have connection with India, yet, like a soldier, we must march on, and we shall go ahead with this discussion. As I was explaining that we did discuss this in month of July, we had 3 panelists at that point in time, and one of the panelists was Brigadier Arun Sahgal. One of the other panelists actually is in the audience at this point in time, Mr. Vijay Nilekani. And although we discussed this issue threadbare at that point in time, but the optics and dynamics have changed over a period of time. You know, in geopolitics, even one day is too long a time. So certain situations have changed, and it's high time that we discuss this issue again. Other than, you know, expounding on this topic on my own, I would rather have our distinguished speakers speak on it. So our first speaker would be Brigadier Arun Sahgal, who will introduce the topic, discuss the background of this topic, including his, presentation in month of July. So let's start with Brigadier Arun Sahgal. Please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Adityanjee. It's an honor to once again be on the CSA show. As we all understand, it's a very important and a sensitive topic that we're going to discuss. Countering America's adversary through Sanctions Act is a legislation that was passed through bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress, which was aimed to impose sanctions on Iran, Russia, and North Korea. The Russian-specific provisions of the CAATSA cover a broad range of contentious issues encompassing US-India relations, which we at present find once again, in a very, very tricky ground owing to build-up in Ukraine. So the sanctions at that time also included cybersecurity, Ukraine, illicit financing, human rights, gas pipelines, defense trade, interference in domestic politics, etc. The important thing for us to understand is that Section 231 of the Act requires the US President to impose sanctions on any entity involved in significant transactions with the defense and intelligence sectors of Russia. India falls in this category of what is called the secondary sanctions. The possible sanctions, which your listeners might like to understand, come under Section 235 and include export of procurement sanctions, prohibition of loans from US and international financial institutions, prohibition of foreign exchange, asset blocking, sanctions on principal executive officers and concerned entities. Turkey and China are two countries which have already been sanctioned. The China was sanctioned in 2018 for purchase of two batteries of S-400 and Su-35 combat aircraft, and Turkey in 2020 for buying similar weapon systems. The issue is, what's so special about S-400? Why the sanctions? The S-400 is an air defense missile system, which no doubt General Saxena will cover in more detail. But importantly, it's one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world and is rated superior to the American counterparts of Patriot and THAAD. Owing to its superior range, enhanced battlefield situational awareness, and capability to detect stealth aircraft like F-35s, the US has been extremely wary about proliferation of S-400s, particularly among its allies and partners. US officials often claim in our discussions that the electronic signatures of F-35s can be leaked to Russia by a mere presence of S-400 system in the vicinity. These concerns have already been reflected through US experience vis-à-vis their deployments and performance of S-400 systems in Turkey, China, and Syria. Interestingly, when China contracted the system, Russia was well ahead of India and Turkey. When deployed, the important point to understand of S-400 vis-à-vis the Chinese is, and that's also an area of concern for the Americans, is that the deployed S-400 system with a coverage of 400 kilometers can target Taiwan, Senkaku Islands, and the Korean Peninsula, all from the strategic positions well within the Chinese mainland. This has proved important for the Americans is that this constrains the deployment of combat aircraft in these airspaces and poses and what is called an existential challenge. In addition, the battlefield operations capability of S-400 air defense system was tested in the Russian air campaign in Syria in 2015. Its success, supplemented by rapid installation of S-400 batteries, brought out significant vulnerabilities of the US and its allies in the region. Coming to India, we contracted the system in 2018 and paid $5.4 billion. As you are all aware, as Ms. Adityanjee mentioned, we have already received two batteries, which will become operational by the middle of 2022. Once again, more will be covered by General Saxena. The reason why we are now going in for the possibility of sanction looms on us is because in the U.S. administration's perception and as part of the U.S. Legislation Act of CAATSA, constitutes a significant transaction. Till such time the batteries were not delivered, it was we were not really coming under the CAATSA Act. But now that the delivery has taken place, India has got into what the law says a significant transaction. What are the US concerns? US cited concerns regarding the interoperability of the S-400 system with US origin equipment in India's arsenal, which is increasing by the day, and the platforms including from attack helicopters, reconnaissance and transport aircraft, etc. A more important part is that India has been signed CAATSA and BECA, allows United States to transfer high-end sensitive data and geospatial intelligence over encrypted satellite-based communication networks. Security of this information and intelligence and the encrypted links is cited as a source of concern by the United States. Now I come to what is called the implications of sanctions. The implications of CAATSA sanctions on India have a widespread implications for India's strategic security and even more importantly, the future of India-US strategic partnership. The US to leverage, for United States, leveraging India's power and influence in the Indian Ocean and South Asia against the Chinese challenge is central to the credibility of the Indo-Pacific strategy. India also welcomes internal balancing contributions from the US through high-end military technology transfers and integration into a wider US security network as an important element of strategic partnerships. Being a strategic partner, this relationship is sustained by convergence of mutually beneficial core interests. And I like to highlight this. It's not one-way traffic. It's a mutually beneficial core interest. And sanction under CAATSA would most certainly undermine the basic edifice of this relationship. From an aspirational perspective, the signing of CISOMA and BECA provides both countries a de facto entry into their respective communication networks. The imposition of CAATSA would constrain the potential of these foundational agreements and jeopardize intelligence cooperation between the two sides. At the strategic level, sanctions would negatively impact India's perception of Biden administration's policy in the Indo-Pacific and to extend its commitment towards India. Another element of this is that it will impact India's partnership in Quad. Because if India is sanctioned, the Quad framework cannot remain immune to the irritations that CAATSA sanctions can generate within the incipient US-led security architecture. And with the CAATSA sanctions, these hesitations of history will once again come to loom within our relationships and will severely impact the Quad's efficacy and impact. What should India do? While we have done a fair amount of heavy lifting diplomatically, and there are perceptions that we will not be sanctioned, at least the reading that we have right now is that the America is willing to give us a one-time waiver, but would like to remind us that future purchases could come under the sanctions. But the India's dilemma is that India, as we are all aware, and the esteemed panelists are also aware, that we had about a 50 to 60% dependent on Russian equipment. And what is more important is that all the strategic equipment which we get is of Russian origin. And that's important for us. There cannot be a break from Russia just because the Americans want it. Now, an interesting facet, if you want to understand, is that in the AUKUS, the Americans are willing to share with his Anglo-Spheric partners the issue of the nuclear technology, but they have never offered us as a similar technology or are willing to even discuss it. That's the important point. So the question for India is that India has to charter a route of its defense capability development based on its own core interests and cannot depend on only one country to service its needs. Secondly, the, it is very clear that as far as when the nuclear issues or any strategic systems are concerned, there will always be a hesitation in the West to provide these systems. And we have been very lucky in that matter that the Russians have always come forward. The giving us of chakra, the cryogenic technology, etc., are all elements of that relationship. So for India to put all eggs in one basket and to depend entirely on the United States is a so what India is currently doing is to broad base its defense establishment, defense procurement, and follow it up as the God bless his soul, General Rawat was trying to do, create a greater Atam Nirbharta in India. The whole idea of a thrust of his this thing, of which we must be thankful to him, was that he wanted India to develop indigenous capacities and capability across the broad spectrum. And uh, there are a huge amount of technological leaps which India is undertaking right now. But in the interim, we have a period of 10 years to 10 to 15 years when we have, which is what I call a period of strategic vulnerability. It is during this period of strategic vulnerability is that the system like CAATSA, sorry, the S400 and related systems that we are going to get or we are developing will come into operation. And this is the period where we are vulnerable to the Chinese. Because Chinese and Indian relationship is not, I just want to close by saying, is not marked by only a boundary issue. It's more an ideological issue and a part of a larger strategic perspective of who is it, who manages Asia, how do we manage Asia, what is the ideological perspective of managing Asia? Because for China, the core reason is to create a Sino-centric Asia where it dominates both ideologically, economically, technologically, and politically. That's something which is not accepted for a civilizational country like India. Thank you. You are muted.
Thank you very much indeed, Brigadier Dr. Arun Sahgal, for such a lucid presentation and, defining the background and India's dilemma at this point in time. And I think you have really set the stage and really set the bar very high. We will not take any questions, of course, at this point in time, because we do the discussions towards the end. But you have really set the stage, and you have given a lot of challenging ideas. We are going to move on to our second speaker, which is retired Lieutenant General Dr. VK Saxena, or Dr. Vijay Kumar Saxena. So, sir, the floor is yours, and I know that you have a PowerPoint, so please go ahead.
Okay. Can you see my presentation, sir?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So, first of all, good evening to friends in US and good morning to the Indian friends and seniors around here. At the onset, I wish to convey my deep gratitude to Dr. Adityanjee and the CSA team for providing me this opportunity to put forward my humble views on the subject of looming CAATSA sanctions on India by the US. At the onset, I must say that these views are very personal and do not have any stamp of authority. Even the privileged knowledge that one has over a period of time is now a personal knowledge of a scholar warrior, as General Ata would like to address us all. Um, so I have chosen certain topics in the subject proper based on my core competency, and I wish to be talking about issues which are these. what is the actual US? Brigadier Sahgal talked about it. He hinted about the analysis of the US resistance. What exactly is the resistance? And based on that resistance, what is going to be likely to be, to my way of thinking, and what is the India's option, or I call it the Indian option. And very basically, these are the three things which I'll be talking about. Coming to the first issue of analysis of the US resistance, let us first get to the aspect of what is the stated objection, and let us get ahead to the real reason behind the stated objection and how it is going to unfold in a period of time. Well, as Brigadier Sagar talked about loss of e-signature. Loss of e-signature, let us delve more into this aspect of e-signature. Now, what has happened, all of us know very well that in the last 8 to 10 years, or maybe 12 years, some high-tech equipment with niche technology areas have entered in India, like P-18 long-range maritime reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare helicopter, C-17 Globemaster, AH-64 attack helicopter, C-17 Chinooks, MH-60R on the way, Sikorsky, Sea Guardian, etc., etc. So they say that once these signatures, once these platforms are around, and you have the CONCASA, you have the PECA, you have the other geospatial intelligence, basic exchange of geospatial intelligence can take place, and encrypted communication network information can go out. So this information is likely to be leaked. This is called e-signature. Okay, if that be e-signature, now let us move forward and say that the result is that this objection is unsubstantiated for the reasons which I'm going to explain now. First of all, uh, e-signature. What is e-signature? E-signature is that when a sensor, maybe S-400 sensor is in any air defense battle, in any battle which involves aerial target, there are three aspects: sensors, shooters, and battle management and control system. Sensors who detect the air threat at long distance, shooters who carry out the kill game, and the battle management control system, which control the battle of few fleeting moments of minutes and seconds. Now, the e-signature, whenever a sensor looks at a particular aerial threat vehicle, which may be C-17, any other vehicle which talked about, the sensor gets to four parameters. It gets azimuth, it gets range, it gets altitude, it gets the time of flight. Now, it also gets what is the radar cross-sectional signature of the equipment. That means how much of it gets painted on a radar screen. Secondly, how much of the stealthy signature or stealth signature the aircraft or the aerial threat vehicle has got. Can it jam a particular radar or a sensor, or it cannot jam? And lastly, what is the electronic warfare capability, not the suit, capability? Can it jam me? Can it analyze me? Can it soft kill me, etc.? So these are the parameters which a sensor picks up, a good sensor picks up when it tracks the aerial threat vehicle. Now, I wish to tell you that besides S-400, it got long range radar from 600 kilometers down to 250 kilometers. It has got radars for medium altitude, low altitude, ballistic missile, and also panoramic radars. There are many other sensors which are already on board. For example, in the age-old SAM6 system, we have P series of radar, which are very, very capable to take out the e-signatures of equipment. We have OSA-AK equipment. We have SAM-19. SAM-13 means Russian missile system, the whole range from a few hundred kilometers to 600, 700 kilometers. So those sensors can carry out the e-signature. Don't have to wait for S-400. And these systems are not today. The systems are there. US systems are there for a few years in India. Their signatures are known. Our point is that these signatures go nowhere. Why? Because in the battle of air defense, the Indian Air Force is responsible for the air defense of the national airspace, and the execution of this kill responsibility is shared between Army, Navy, and Air Force based on the core competency of each service in the respective domain of operations of land, sea, and air. Having said that, there is one umbilical cord which controls the entire air defense operations of the country, which is called the Integrated Air Command and Control System, going by the acronym IACCS. Integrated Air Command and Control System. This is the system which is an umbilical cord which connects the sensors which I talked about, the shooters and the battle management and control system. It is the system which this IACS decides to detect the air threat at the longest range, identify it whether it is friendly or hostile, prioritize it which is the threat which is most potent to us, select the weapon system across board, Navy, Army, Air Force, launch that weapon, and thereafter control the air defense battle by minute to minute. So that IACCS is Indian manned, Indian made, and Indian controlled. Therefore, I wish to tell the audience and tell the stakeholders that the signatures, even if the signatures of any equipment which we can not only do it by S400, by many other systems are not getting patched up independently anywhere, not getting patched up on any system, not going out of the system. It is being patched up inside and in a close end game. And therefore, this e-signature business is not as stated. Even if you have embedded software, there is no way that you will cross the IACCS because the source code, the end-to-end game of IACCS is with India. So if that be so, what is the real reason? Why is there so much of hue and cry about sanctions and so on? The real reason is two reasons. First, as Brigadier Sahgal already pointed out, to prevent the revenue flow to Russia. This was the main event, main talk which he was talking about. Now, what is this preventing the revenue flow? Is any person or any entity which does significant transaction on the Russian defense or intelligence sector is what to be sanctioned, is prevent a revenue flow. And 39,000 crore, 5.85 billion USD is not the only game. We're talking about the recurring cost of missile. We're talking about the overall upgrades, simulators, training, spares, huge game. So this is the one of the main reasons to revenue flow. What is the second reason? The second reason is this: missing the boat for a generation or more. When you get an equipment like S400, when you get a BMD system, which is a long-range air defense and anti-ballistic missile defense system, you don't buy it for a year or two or 10 years. The system has a life of 30 to 40 years. Now, US has been missing this boat for a long time now. Why? Remember that in defense acquisition, they had offered us the Patriot. I was there in the trial process in the 104 Patriot PSC 3 game, as also they even offered the third game. I will not go into one-on-one comparison because the time does not permit, but we had made a very passionate and dispassionate and a matter of the fact comparison of one-on-one, not only of range, height, perception, significance, swath of area covered, and it has come out, it proved to anybody that this is the system which we are buying is far above. Then I remember in July 2018, the Defense Acquisition Council allowed a $1 billion contract of NASAM system, NASAM 2, National Air Surface to Air Missile System. Of course, that is not moved forward and it will not, for some reason, which I will not explain. And therefore, they feel that this has, for a long time, this is gone. For a 30, 40 years, you have missed out on certain things, which is the air defense market is a multi-billion dollar market. When you have, US has made a dent, having increased its Indian export to 557% in the last 10 years from 12-13 to 18-19. Why not in the air defense category? Why not in the air defense domain? That is where is the main issue. Then analyzing further, these we checked out one-on-one, which I said I will not going into it. Even NASAM, I said not going further. And therefore, what next? Important thing is, somebody has stated reason, somebody has said this, what next? Brigadier Sahgal was talking about the CAATSA, which is a fait accompli, and so on. And this fait accompli sanctions will come. But Yes or no will depend on what is at stake. What is at stake with the US people? That is what is I'm trying to bring out as a professional who has been in the first-hand experience of many things. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is the at stake. 25 to 30 years on a long and unwinding road US has marched. I have seen that from the time I was there in service from 80s and 90s, US stood out with their FMS system of selling of equipment and many of the air defense equipment in terms of guns and missiles, and went on. They said that their FMS system of um, LOR, letter of request, letter of acceptance, and the federal government's acceptance, etc., will come, which never gelled with our DPP of having the RFI, making a GSQR, issuing the RFP procedure, carrying out technical trials, and go on. They stood out. And thereafter, sometime in December 12, the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative took place. I remember US Secretary of State, Mr. Leon Panetta. I talked to Mr. Aston Charter, that time Deputy Secretary, that we must have some engagement strategy with India which goes beyond our reluctance to share equipment and least share technology. Don't even come down to sharing something which is niche technology. We established a defense trade and technology initiative, and then that is a history. It became a hallmark of bilateral relations and became a very important trademark in building the relationship and co-development, co-production, sharing of technologies. There were 11 of various joint working groups under the DTTI. I sat on two of them a number of times, and I found that the US was forthcoming through the DTTI route in sharing technologies and equipment. This became a landmark. And what I was mentioning earlier, starting from the C-17 to A-64, etc., many of them came through the technology trade initiative. This got a shot and arm during Make in India. I remember Mr. Modi and US President meeting in September 2014 and January 15 again with President Obama, and giving a big push to the DTTI, or Defense Trade and Technology History. And it went on and on and on and went further. And the rest is a history. We had this business summit. You remember how the US pushed its game of defense exports to India through this route. And rest, as the Brigadier Sahgal brought about his history, 2+2 foundational agreement took place. Then the defense trade jumped up from 557% between 2008 to 2013-17. Number of Indo-US exercises increased like anything. Renaming of Pacific Command to Indo-Pacific Command. Then Malabar took place, then Lemoa came, then the Quad came, and the Quad summit later 2021, the position which the Indian government, India got at the hands of US for whatever reason, for the prime importance of India in the Indo-Pacific, for having a counterweight in the assertive China stance, for having a quad of four in the waters in the Indo-Pacific, whatever may be the game, the history knows that we are so very important to US at this point in time. And therefore, and second push, of course, of the defense industry. German defense industry in US calls the shots. You just go check out the Aero India 2021, how the Boeing went over the top to sell India hundreds of things. FA-18 Block 3 aircraft, which is entering US, was offered. General Atomics Vivek Lal meeting Prime Minister on 23rd September 2021, giving all sorts of assurance to push forward the Sea Guardian. Lockheed Martin coming out with catchy slogans of F-21 for India, from India. So that pressure stand. CAATSA is one thing, fine, but this pressure this pressure will stand. And therefore, what could be coming? What could be coming is very simple. We all know that CASA is a fait accompli thing, but the US stakeholders and US lawmakers, and as number of them are already talking about the waivers and sanctions, They may talk about 231A, 231B, and C, which has the provisions to give sanctions. India is not Turkey. India is not Turkey where the SSB can be sanctioned. India has its own cloud by the very fact of our own existence, our geopolitical entity, our importance in the Committee of Nations, and our instant importance in the face of China as perceived by US, and the way it is developing in this manner. This is what 231B talks about, an important provision of that this particular sanctioning is not in security interest of US, because India will not be the one who will say that we will curb our inventory with the Russians. As Brigadier Sahgal said, 67% of Indian equipment is of Russian origin. Not only that, we are dependent on Russia, we are building our own muscle. And as you all are aware, that India has its own program AD, which is Ballistic Missile Defense System of India, which is building up on its own. But the period of strategic vulnerability, which Brigadier Sahgal brought out, needs to be plugged in. And we know that we are walking a tightrope. We know very well. We are walking a tightrope. This tightrope belongs to the tightrope of strategic autonomy. We are demanding, we are saying, we are trying to put out our thing that in the window of strategic vulnerability, we cannot be putting our eggs in one basket, not in Russian basket, not in US basket. We need to put our eggs in our own basket. And our own basket, fortunately, is getting stronger by the day. You're talking of Dhanush, you're talking of our own BMD system, you're talking of our own Meteor, our Astra system, our Akash system, all are coming up over a period of time. We are only need to put our act together in this period of strategic vulnerability. So what is the Indian option? Indian option in very one word and very one slide is to stay the course. We need to stay the course. We need not say, okay, show some fear or apprehension. Look, you are annoyed with us and you are sanction us. That be it. Because on this sanction, as Brigadier brought out earlier, it's not only just a weapon system, your own reputation as a reliable partner, your own reputation across NATO. You have already done sanction to us. You are repeating the during Shakti time. You will repeat that, and once you repeat that, you will lose your credibility for once for all. And also, what about that defense industries? Will they close shop over a period of time? All that stands on one side. And therefore, the Indian option is very clear. Stay the course. That has been the Indian option. And I hope our decision makers take this option of staying the course. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant General Saxena, for a very informative, technologically, brilliant presentation with a passionate appeal for India to stay the course. Uh, you know, Students of history will know that India has been sanctioned from 1974 onwards, and India has withstood sanctions. I will make only that comment at this point in time because I don't want to start the discussion at this stage. We will go to our final and most distinguished speaker, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, for his overview and summing up of this particular issue in geopolitics. So, General Sir, floor to you.
Thank you very much, Adityanjee, and Jai Hind to all our viewers and listeners. I know the time here is was 6:30 in the morning, but I think we are wide awake here with this amazing subject you decided to discuss. And I take off from where both Brigadier Sahgal and General Saxena left off. In the next 15 minutes or so, a little more perhaps, I'll try and summarize this and also give a historical perspective to the whole gamut of Indo-US relations and Indo-Soviet stroke Indo-Russian relations. But my hypothesis also ultimately points to that only. We were sanctioned in 1998, as also brought out by Gen Syed, by Brigadier Sahgal and by Gen Saxena both. We were sanctioned in 1998. We stayed the course. We held on. And it finally led to the Indo-US deal, the Indo-US nuclear deal. So we are looking at a similar kind of a discourse which is developing here. But let me take you back to the whole course of the relationships in terms of geopolitics, starting with non-aligned movement. India, you are aware, was always non-aligned for many, many years. Our concept of national security in the 50s, early 60s was absolutely antique. But we came into our own in the 60s, in the mid 60s particularly, and that too with great assistance from both the United States and the then Soviet Union. Our initial consignment of weaponry, which came in to assist us against the Chinese onslaught on the northern borders, came from the United States. But subsequently, in terms of tanks, in terms of other equipment, it was the Soviet Union which came to our assistance. The Americans, of course, sanctioned us in 1965 also. But those sanctions were essentially military sanctions. You may recall that the United States also assisted India even in 1965-66 with the PL-480 food program, because India was short at that time of food grains. But despite that, we continued. 1970, post 1971, things started changing a lot. 1971, I think, was a very, very important juncture, and the Indo-Soviet Treaty, the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation, for 20 years, was what actually changed the geopolitical landscape of South Asia completely. I have my doubts that we could have so confidently gone to war without the signing of this particular treaty in the month of August 1971, which really saying cemented the Indo-Soviet relationship. Although we were very much part of the non-aligned movement, this was not considered to be a defense part. It was not considered to be alignment. It was not considered to be an alliance. It was still considered to be a partnership. And we had already received the T-55 tanks. We had in 1970, post 71, we started receiving the T-72 tank. We started receiving General Saxena would of course bear us out technologically. The SAM-6 and the SAM-7 systems. Almost immediately after their display in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, that was the time when air defense really took off. If you remember the very famous war of started on the 6th of October 1973, in which a 10-kilometer band along the Suez Canal was created with an air defense cover. And that is the kind of air defense cover which India was also seeking. And with the weaponry which was provided to us by the Soviets, it was so provided. And that is what stayed the course with us for many, many years. Post the Cold War, 1989, things started changing a wee bit. And it was with the Kicklighter proposals from the United States. General Kicklighter was the chief of the Pacific Army, visited India, and the first of the Indo-US military partnerships, should I say, or cooperation, really, not partnerships, commenced at approximately that time. And we were still very much a part of the Russian partnership. The handover of the breakup of the Soviet Union into 15 republics had led to Russia as the rump state. Ukraine had much of the defense manufacturing facilities. A part of it was with Kazakhstan. Essentially, the nuclear aspect was with Kazakhstan. Some of it was with Belarus. But it was primarily Ukraine, which was one of the major core sectors. Of course, Russia had a very large part of it. That time itself also, many of us are wondering what will be the future of Indo-Russian relationships and who will we depend on subsequently for military equipment. It was very clear in the early 90s that our DRDO had not succeeded. It was not capable of delivering us the state-of-the-art equipment that India was seeking, and everyone knew the next 20, 25 years there's going to be a huge takeoff. That was the time, if you remember, information technology was just coming into being, and And this is why India was wishing to continue its multilateral kind of approach. We were looking at Israel, we were looking at France, we were looking at Italy, Sweden, the UK, the BAE systems of UK, and of course the United States. But no way did we want to leave the hand of the Russians, because besides the military equipment aspect, it was the geopolitical importance of having Russia on your side. Remember, with the world changing after 1989, we were first hit in Kashmir with the hybrid war, the hybrid proxy war in Kashmir. There were events happening in Bosnia at the same time, and they were happening in Chechnya. And it was quite certain that the very important areas in the near future out at that particular stage would be Central Asia, where the potential of the growth of terrorism, Islamic fanaticism would possibly rise, and similarly so in the Middle East. Having the Russians on your side would obviously balance the entire strategic game which would emerge. So, with that in mind, in the with the turn of the millennium, of course, 1998, I've already mentioned the aspect of the sanctions after the very famous nuclear test and India going nuclear, overtly nuclear, and then subsequently ending up in the Indo-US nuclear deal under President Bush, which has stood us in good stead. But it is around about 2014, 15 that the, uh, the situation started changing quite drastically. As very correctly brought out, 70% of India's military equipment, which is to be fielded in battle tomorrow, will be of Russian Soviet origin, right? But despite that, uh, and the manner in which the Indo-US relationship seemed to be moving forward from 2014 onwards, it became evident to Russia that perhaps it was losing its hold, or rather, the Indo-Russian relationship was getting diluted. I remember visiting Moscow in the year 2015, and that was the time when the Russians would not speak openly, but there would be references here and there to our historical relationship, and 1971 would be mentioned very very often, and somehow an element of hurt which seemed to be evident in the Russian approach towards their relationship and their talks with us at that particular time. It's in the shadow of this around 2017-18 that the S-400 deal was signed. And it was obvious that India, General Saxena has just explained, India's air defense requirements, and I may admit to you that as military personnel, most of us, except for the hardcore air defense people, most of us have a very, very fledgling kind of a knowledge on air defense, because air defense is considered to be a very technical domain. In most courses of instruction, also, you'll find that when it comes to air defense, no one ever wants to speak. It's mostly the air defense people themselves who speak, because only they know what they speak and what is necessary to be spoken at that particular time. So there's no doubt that at this particular time, around 2016-17, it was becoming evident that there were holes in the Indian defense, and it was necessary for us to get the best of technologies. The threat of the northern borders, the threat on the western borders, both the threats were building just as they are building even today. If anyone thinks that the western borders have suddenly receded, the threats have suddenly receded, we got to think again. Just because the northern borders are very active at the moment, we should not ever imagine that the western borders are not so active. So, with that in mind, and the CAATSA issue was very much in the air at that time. Turkey had received the S-400 already. The demonstration of S-400 was already there for everyone to see in Syria at that particular time. But I think the very important issues came to a head sometime in 2020 itself, even with the pandemic background. And the coercion which was being done openly by the Chinese in Ladakh. It was important for us to understand that the Chinese may never go to war, but against India. Uh, Bringing 50,000 troops into Ladakh was no intent of war, to my appreciation. 50,000 troops was essentially to coerce India, to force it and to show India that it was a second-grade power, that it could not touch the China in its entirety, and that at will the Chinese could always do what they wished to do along the northern borders. That was the essential intent. Very important aspect of this, which needs to be kept in mind, is which I would like to bring out here, is the fact that from 2014-15 onwards, a series of events had taken place in India, which seemed to show the rest of the world, and particularly China, and Pakistan to a great extent, about India's rising strategic confidence. Now, if you just cast your mind back, 2015 is the time when Prime Minister Modi made his dash to Lahore, and after that, everything seemed to go southwards. 1st of January 2016, we had the Pathankot attack. 2016, September 18th, we had the Uri attack. And thereafter, we had the surgical strikes. That was the first time that ownership was taken by the government of a strike across the line of control. Thereafter, in 2017, we stood our ground for 72 days in Doklam. Thereafter, in 2018-19, we continued with our operation All Out in Jammu and Kashmir, wiping out a large strength of terrorists. In 2019 came Balakot. And thereafter, the decision on the 5th of August to review, and not review, but to amend the Article 370. Now, each of these events may not be very, very significant seen in just in isolation. But when you see the cumulative effect of all this, it sent a huge message to the world that India was gaining confidence, and India could look after its security. It could be more proactive in its approach towards security, right? And therefore, in the midst of this whole business of the S-400 was actually adding oodles to India's strategic confidence. And this is something which the Chinese were extremely apprehensive about. Why the Chinese, even the Pakistanis, which I always feel that in the background of the pandemic, in the month of April 2020, this event particularly happened. We have faced the S-400 of the Chinese on the other side. But the Russians, what is learned is that the Russians withheld the support, the provision of missiles to a great extent to the Chinese, much less than what was promised, so that to be in a position to be able to provide and cater for its Indian contract to batteries and missiles or whatever it is, as far as India was concerned, which was a clear strategic indication that in the standoff which was taking place on the borders, the Russians were sending a message to the Chinese. Their equipment was being fielded on both sides of the line of actual control. But obviously, they were clearly telling the Chinese that they were on the wrong and that the Indians deserved the S-400 and they were delivering it to them on a higher priority. This, I think, message has not been adequately read by most strategic analysts as such. The US, in the end of this, the US has suddenly come back again with CAATSA, especially after the arrival of the first two batteries. Whether this is just a coercive strategy, whether this is brinkmanship, only time will tell. But it is very clear that the geopolitical landscape of the world after the pandemic is going to be something very different. And when you look at it in the background of what happened in Afghanistan, and the inability of the United States to actually stay the course in Afghanistan and actually influence the outcome of things in Afghanistan, it just shows that the United States, to a great extent, has lost its capability to perhaps influence strategic issues around the world. It is looking at the Indo-Pacific. It is looking at shifting out from here. But over the years, Barack Obama's great intent of trying to move out, to relocate, to balance the United States priorities to create the pivot to Asia. All this was held back because of Afghanistan and because of the Middle East. Now the opportunity has come. The United States, even in the backdrop of a virtual defeat in Afghanistan, is now looking at the Indo-Pacific. India is a crucial partner. The only one in the Indo part of it is India, as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. So, will this partnership cannot just be wished away, and the Americans would not want to do away with it. Keeping therefore the backdrop of what happened with the sanctions of '98 and the U.S. Indo-U.S. nuclear deal, I think I would finally just go along and ensure that even as we restudy, re-evaluate, review the entire geopolitical landscape of South Asia and particularly West Asia at this time, because I do strongly feel that a lot of things are going to happen from the western side of India, from the western flank of India. We need to keep our course as far as our relationship with Russia is concerned. I entirely agree that the aspect of finances is very, very important. The Soviet Union came to its knees primarily because of finances. The Russians will not, perhaps have learned the lessons of that and will not allow themselves to be boxed into a corner on that. So, with that in mind, the balanced relationship, dealing with multilateralism, is what is the mantra for India at this particular stage. And I fully endorse the opinion that staying the course at this stage is the most prudent option for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, General Hasnain, for a very fascinating historical analysis of geopolitical context and relationship between India, US, and Russia, and possibly China. Before we go on to question and answer session, I'll make some editorial comments because our all experts were speaking from Indian point of view and what India should do. If the mandarins of the State Department, the Foggy Bottom, the Pentagon, and White House are listening to me, my advice would be for them to remember that international relations and geopolitics is not a zero-sum game. You know, you cannot have relationship, strategic partnership with one country at the expense of another country. There are degrees of relationships, and it's a question of convergence of interests. In this stage and in this day, coercion does not succeed, so you have to really strive to get partners. That would be the message to mandarins in the US bureaucracy. If I use very blunt expression and use a Hindi proverb, what US is trying to do is to cut its nose to spite its face. This is exactly what US will achieve if it were hypothetically to impose sanctions on India using CAATSA. That you will damage a burgeoning strategic relationship with an important partner that could become a net security provider in Indo-Pacific, that could possibly, without even acknowledging it, balance a rising hegemon. So ball is in the US court. What do you want to do? Do you want to strike at your own feet? Please go ahead and do it. God save you. Lastly, before I go to question and answer sessions, I am bringing a particular point of view, and that is extraterritorial application of domestic law. So you have a law that your own Congress creates. Why does it have to be applicable to India, which is not even a second country, it's a third country? You do whatever you want to do with your adversaries, but do not involve extraterritorial application of your law. Because if that becomes a pattern, and that is the pattern, a time will come when you will receive counter sanctions in various ways. So the game can be played both ways. So those are my editorial comments, because there has to be a legal basis. There is no de jure legal basis for extraterritorial application of sanctions. And I think this should be, besides the pillar of India's own strategic independence, should be two aspects on which Indian case needs to be rested. That India has strategic autonomy, independence, and India will continue to do what is good for India, not what is good for US. India has to safeguard its own interests. India has to safeguard its own backyard. India has to safeguard its own territory, its land border, its maritime border, its aerospace assets. So India will do whatever India can do to guard India's security. Whether people like it or not, that is too bad. The second aspect is that you cannot keep on applying sanctions on India using a domestic law which is not internationally acknowledged, which does not have universal acceptance. So those were my editorial comments, and I'm going to start taking the questions from the audience. So the first question is from Mr. Dinesh Nilawar, and any of the panelists can answer the question. How can India manage these relations in future? Will India, after a $5 trillion economy, be able to handle such pressure without worry of impact of sanctions? Any one of the panelists?
If I may step in, because I think I'm sure Brigadier Sahgal will have a lot to say on this also. But yes, the whole issue, if I just go back to the question exactly, how can India manage these relations in the future? Will India, after a $5 trillion economy, be able to handle without worry of impact and sanction? Yes, India's economy today is approximately 2.5 and beyond a little. Our intent of achieving 5 trillion could not really materialize at this stage because of the pandemic, no doubt setbacks, but we are heading towards it. And in fact, in many of my writings, I've said, why should we limit ourselves to 5 trillion? We should be looking at a $10 trillion economy by the end of the decade, 2030 or so. Having said that, I think there's no doubt economic stability, economic independence is one of the very, very important issues here, considering the fact that the former Soviet Union was brought to its knees, as I mentioned earlier, primarily due to economics. It could not sustain itself. It could not sustain the war machine that it had created, and the system. The Cold War could not just have carried on like that. But I don't think in this case, in the case of India, economics is really such a great matter. We have, I think, crossed that threshold. And as very correctly brought out, editorial comments just now, I think India can stand on its own. Even now, India, its national security is the first priority, and comprehensive national security at that. The nation will probably make every possible sacrifice for the sake of its security. We have started to invest much more into technology, and probably the next 10 years will tell us where we are finally going. Atmanirbharta and issues like that will all come to the head in the next few years. So while, yes, it adds psychologically, it adds oodles to your confidence. Overall, there's no doubt. I would say that we are beyond that, and now as a middle power in the geopolitical landscape, India will just have to go ahead, not concerning itself with the issues such as have come to a head over CAATSA at this particular time. Over to Brigadier Sahgal. I'm sure he has more to say on this.
Sorry, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Please unmute yourself.
Partnerships are driven by strategic interests. And the way the lie of the ground is, and given the fact that the United States itself is under a lot of pressure in internationally, globally, it is trying to build up partnerships. The G7 summit, which took place a couple of days back, and the fact that the whole notion of repeated American senior leadership visits to Southeast Asia and Asia are indicative that they're trying to build partnerships and relationships in the region where they were earlier top dogs, but now they are having problems in managing the regional geopolitical dynamics. The second issue is the fulcrum of the US Indo Pacific strategy, and the one and the eastern end is controlled by the United States and its alliance system. The United States is fully aware the Western fulcrum is dependent on India's capacities and capabilities. So, under the current dynamics of play, the United States cannot afford to have, like India's strategic vulnerability is dependent on external balancing with the relationship with the United States and other partners in Asia. Similarly, the United States balancing of the Indo-Pacific, India is an important partner and a player. Number two, India although remains a very major economic market. We are on the cusp of signing a mini trade deal. It should happen within about 2-3 months' time, at least by middle of August next year. There should be a mini trade deal, and India can be looked upon as a close to about 400 or 500 billion dollar trading economy with the United States as things go forward. So, if you look at the future perspective in mind, putting India off at this particular juncture is something which the United States cannot afford, and neither can India afford because of, like I said, its India's strategic vulnerability. So the question is, how do you manage these tensions? Rightly, you mentioned, Adityanjee, that you cannot have extraterritorial dimensions to domestic laws. In the United Nations parlance, American sanctions have no meaning. They are fundamentally wrong. The problem basically is that the United States has tended to control all the multilateral institutions, which through whose support these sanctions are activated. Now, the whole dynamic of play, which is now taking place globally, is that the Americans are trying to preserve that extra constitutionality of the multilateral systems, and the Chinese are trying to rebuild the system and questioning that and saying those institutions have past their time, and you cannot have one country to decide on what is right and what is wrong in the globally. It has to be a much more multilateral system where everybody has to have a say. So India's strategic autonomy comes into play primarily because India is not driven by the elements of pressure on it by any entity acting in its own strategic interests, but India's dynamic at play is dictated by India's own strategic interests. And that's why India is the most interesting player in the global system. At one level, we are a partner of quadrilateral, which comprises United States, Japan, Australia, and India. On the other hand, we are partners we are a member of RIC, Russia, India, China, and also the SCO. So you see, and here it is a very interesting dynamic. People don't try to, I'm just trying to highlight it. When it comes to the maritime domain, we have a Western-oriented maritime orientation through quadrilaterals and minilaterals with Indonesia and what is called a peninsular or an oceanic ASEAN. When it comes to the continental domain, we have our relationships with the two major continental powers in the globe, and that is Russia and China. So India is sort of balancing its relationships. India is not giving into any strategic autonomy, but at the same time, India is fighting this unilateral challenge being posed to it by China. Now, that unilateral challenge which is being posed to it by China is being contested by India, and that contestation is making the Chinese realize that, and to also send a message to other players in the region that there is a limit to Chinese power and influence. So there is a big game in play, geostrategic game in play at this particular point in time. And I do not believe that the Americans have the luxury of taking actions which will impair their relationships with India. I'll stop here. If there are any further questions, I'll take.
Uh, can I make a word? Can I make a word of contribution in this question with the permission of the editor?
Sure.
I just want to say one word, that how will we manage our relations in future is not in the domain of Russia or US. I strongly believe that we have the guts and the muscle and our geopolitical position to walk multiple channels based on our national interests rather than based on somebody's whims and fancies. Number one. Number two, our future lies in our own domain of standing up on our own in Atmanirbhar Bharat. And if somebody has a doubt, he should have seen what India has recently put up in Indian Army, in the Army 2021 show in Moscow. There were 11 verticals of equipment for display for the world to take it, not for US to see or not see, starting from the Tejas to Astra to Meteor to Akash to QR-7, etc., etc. So I'm trying to say that this future, when you talk of future, grant two things to India. Firstly, we are not only the second largest arms exporter today, we are also 23rd largest exporters. Our export quantity has gone up from 0.05% to 0.1%. That's besides the point. We have the gumption today, based on whatever geopolitics has forced upon us, our position in the Indo-Pacific, we have the capability and we have the historical precedent of staying the course and retaining our strategic autonomy, come what may. And as regards your extraterritorial relationship, I just want to quote the President Trump. He said about CAATSA that this is not only seriously flawed, it stymies his free conduct of foreign policy. And in the haste, they have got something which he will not be able to opt to press ahead. This is the US president talking about CAATSA. What are you talking about? India and its application on it. So my point which I was trying to put across is our future depends on our Atmanirbharta rather than US, Russia and the rest of the world. They can sit and watch how India moves forward in strategic autonomy. Thank you.
Very well said, very well articulated by all three of our panel experts. I'll move on to the next question, and it is from Pradeep. A little bit longish question. Who do you consider within American establishment whose views would most likely prevail in the final American decision? Would it be Pentagon, the Congress, or the White House handlers of President Biden? Who should the NRIs try to work with most? Brigadier Sahgal, please unmute yourself.
If I can jump in, I think there are two senators, I'm forgetting their name, who have already
Yes.
initiated a move to exempt India from sanctions. So,
Ted and Watt, sir.
yeah, okay, yeah. So it's got an interesting name also. The legislation has got a name. I'm forgetting the name right now. So basically, what we are looking at is there is uh, within the U.S. Political establishment, there is a bipartisan support building up that this relationship is too important to be squandered for some reason. And if all of us are aware that General McMaster was the man behind that the the giving a National Defense Security Act, the National Defense Administration Act, NDA 2019 exemption, which while the Congress wanted to control even the presidential waiver, he said no. The presidential waiver, president can act on his own to provide the waiver if he wants to. So the and my third point is that the Pentagon, there are some hawks within Pentagon, but by and large, my understanding of dealing with those gentlemen and ladies is that they generally fall in place. They are pragmatic people. So the word out, as per our assessment, that is my think tank and other people whom we interact with, assessment is that present case, the Americans will not act in a manner that will impact the relationship. There would be an attempt on to force India to go slow in future procurements from Russia. But there is also a perception building up within the United States that simply putting India onto sanction list or this kind of a pressure tactic is not going to work. Is there a case for example, leasing out? I'm not aware of this, but we have heard some murmurs of leasing out some strategic equipment of an equal choice like we had Chakra to India. Is there a case? So the whole idea is rather than sanctioning India, a greater integration of India through proper posturing, ask, proper to for a word to inducements, if you may must. Is there a case for India to keep India within the flock rather than allow India to get out of the flock? So there is this tendency and there is a perception within the American lobby. That I'm not saying stating India's case how India will react, but I'm just trying to share with you some of the since we have a lot of interaction with the think tanks and the some of these policy people who keep coming to India. So this is what the general perception is that they do not want to break up relationship with India. They want to weigh out and offer suitable inducements in terms of strategic systems to India. Thank you.
Any comments from the other panelists?
May I come in,
Sure, sir.
Editor, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Very erudite comments by Brigadier Sahgal. I will step in with three issues which I think are of particular importance. Number one, I wonder if our very eminent audience is aware that Israel and China, for example, have a very strong relationship. And the kind of investment which the Chinese have done in Israel is nobody's business. China is sanctioned to a great extent by the United States as far as technologies are concerned. But we never hear of a word of a sanction against Israel. I don't think there's anything like that ever heard. It's a question of trust. How strong is the strategic trust that you develop yourself? This is a terminology, an awkward terminology, strategic trust. India and the United States have developed a great deal of strategic trust. And I think the Indo-US nuclear deal bore this out very well. In fact, I thought at that particular time we really have gone over the hill as far as our problems were concerned. But obviously, there is within the United States strategic community a degree of concern still existing as far as India is concerned. You must remember that it's not a question of these various entities which have been identified here, Mr. Pradeep, of the Pentagon, the Congress, the White House handlers of President Biden, etc. You have to also understand the lobbies which are working here. You have to understand which other countries are interested in neutralizing and negating anything which comes towards India. For example, the US-Pakistan relationship has not been mentioned so far, right? And let me assure you, from my experience of undertaking courses in the United States, visiting the United States in military delegations, etc., working in the United Nations with people from Pakistan and the United States, let me tell you, as an example, anecdotally, if a group of Indian Army officers are standing along with Pakistani officers and a US official comes, he will first go to the Pakistanis and shake hands. He will not come to the Indians. The depth of relationship of US and Pakistan is to be understood. We feel the importance of India, no doubt. We have got a loyalty to our country, no doubt, but we have to understand the depth of relationship which exists there. Pakistan is strategically so important to them, geostrategically so important to the United States. Could the war in Afghanistan have been fought without the aid of Pakistan? Could the access to Central Asia on the land route ever be done? Because of the pariah type of relationship that exists with Iran, can any other country provide that route to the United States except Pakistan? So, and then China's access into the Indian Ocean, the Northwest Indian Ocean, is all through Pakistan. So, this Pakistan-US relationship is not going to go anywhere. And therefore, the lobbies which work for Pakistan interests are going to continue working against us within the United States system at all times. So, while keeping this in mind, I would strongly say politicians come and go, right? Presidents come and go. But it is the Pentagon officials, it is the State Department officials, it is the bureaucrats, the defense bureaucrats who need to be cultivated the most. They are the ones who are there permanently, and they are the ones who are making the advice. And their advice cannot always, I just mentioned about General McMaster, their advice cannot be wished away. And therefore, while we must continue to manage our affairs with an existing presidency and a future presidency, we don't know whether President Trump is going to come back or not, right? We need to work with the Congress, whoever is in dominant role in the Congress at that particular time. But most of all, I think we need to work with those who are permanently there and have got virtually permanent interests as far as international relations are concerned. Thank you.
Say something.
Sure. Please go ahead.
The two senators which Brigadier was mentioning was Mark Warner of Democratic Party and John Cornyn of the Republicans.
Yes.
They have written a letter to President Biden that this sanctions will hurt us more than anything else and needs to be formed. It is my sense as a very humble analyst that here is an India-US relationship which have come to a stage of maturity which Janata just brought about, and the importance of US, India in the hands of US. There is this CAATSA lying in one corner, which does not have extraterritorial jurisdiction, which some senators are trying to make. US is actually at pains to find an exit strategy so that there is a way to find a waiver out, not to hurt $1 billion investments for one particular cog in the wheel called CAATSA, which their own president discarded and does not have extraterritorial jurisdiction. And as in India also, we are also a democracy. We all know that what matters is the running lobby of bureaucrats, the one who advise and show the front face to the politicians. That is what the NRIs need to talk about. Thank you.
So we are already beyond our time. There may be other questions, but I think we have to come to an end. I will just make my role as moderator and last comment. And it may sound very flippant, but that is where I would opine. United States, by enacting CAATSA, has tied itself into knots. And it will require a great amount of contortion and gymnastic on part of US establishment to untie the knots. The ball lies in the other court. India must stay on the course and continue to do what it is doing, what she is doing. So although there are always, apocalyptic apprehensions, nothing is going to happen. India is going to survive. India is going to withstand any possible sanctions, if any. But the ball lies in US court. They have tied themselves into knots, and it's up to them how to untie themselves in the knots. I must again thank our distinguished panelists, Brigadier Dr. Arun Sahgal, Lieutenant General Dr. VK Saxena, and Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. It was a wonderful evening discussing geopolitics and military issues pertaining to CAATSA and air defense. But like all good things, this roundtable discussion has to come to an end. So my namaskar to all our friends, whether in US or in India. We hope our panelists will continue to come and enlighten us in the same manner. And we shall meet again for yet another roundtable discussion in month of January. Till that, goodbye. And we thoroughly enjoyed your company, your erudition, your wisdom. And we hope that your benevolent, patronage will be with Council for Strategic Affairs. Thank you very much indeed.
Jai Hind.